Today, I'm excited to be joined by Michael Long. Michael's a director of law firm MJL Law. His company helps trades and construction business owners to protect their business by creating bulletproof terms and conditions, subcontractors agreements, and other legal documents. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Craig. Excited to be here. Looking forward to sharing some knowledge.
Yep, I'm super excited you're with us as well. So today, Michael and I are going to be exploring the different types of legal documents you must have to protect you, your business, and your assets. Now, before we get into it, Michael, I'd love to hear a bit about your backstory and more about your business. So start wherever you want to start.
Cheers, Craig. Well, just in short, I've worked in law for 24 years now. Set up on my own nine years ago after working at large city centre law firms. Decided to go on my own way, and one of the primary focuses of the businesses was to help small, medium-sized firms out there. Get in contact with a lot of those companies, trades, etc., who we can help out, and hopefully bring them the best possible service and get them on the right legal footing.
Fantastic. Okay. So, Michael, why is it important that businesses and business owners in particular need to have the correct terms and conditions and agreements in place? And what are the consequences that they face by not having any T's and C's or any legal documents, by having nothing in place? What are the consequences?
Really good question, Craig. Something that crops up quite often, really. In terms of sort of the benefits, why they're needed, the options are endless. So what I'll really do is kind of drill down on some of the main points, which probably will tick some boxes with people who are potentially listening on into this. The first one being is getting paid, stopping those debts, stopping the unpaid invoices. However you want to term it, ultimately, cash coming into the business is absolutely key for every business, no matter what industry you're in. So your T's and C's are there to ensure that you get paid, in a nutshell. Do it in various ways, but the main point is get that money in, reduce the unpaid invoices, and basically puts your company on a far stronger legal footing. The beauty of the T's and C's is they'll have really detailed payment terms within there. And obviously the benefit of that, it not only outlines what you expect in terms of when you're going to get paid, but on top of that, if you have a client who thinks, actually, I don't want to pay these on time, I'm just going to basically use these to bankroll my own company, we can apply late payment interest. So if it's a B2B transaction, business to business, you can actually charge late payment interest under the late payment commercial debt regulations. So that's Bank of England plus 8%. So at the moment it's 13.25%, which is pretty high amount. But often just using that as a bit of leverage to lean on people who basically don't think they should pay you. In addition to that, you can also write in that you can recover your legal fees, particularly important for debts under 25k, more particularly under £10,000, which fall into the small claims limit. So if you write that into your terms, you've got a chance to actually recover your money as well, because there's a little bit of a mistake, I would say, in UK civil law, which means that, if it's a debt of that value, you can't recover your legal fees, which is a bit silly, really, because ultimately, if you're having to chase somebody for money that you're owed, you should be able to get your money back as well. So that's a really, really big one and a really important one, and one that often triggers people to maybe step forward and get some T's and C's. Another one is client disputes. Unfortunately, no matter what industry you're in, we all get client disputes. You can be the best company in the world, but ultimately, we can all get the odd awkward client here and there. The beauty of these is once you've got them in place, if and when that awkward client does rear their head, you've got the right legal document to fall back upon. So, it's one of those scenarios where Joe Bloggs, your customer, will come to you. You've done absolutely nothing wrong, but they'll try and be awkward, try and say you've done X, Y, and Z. You full well know that you've abided by the terms of the agreement, but they're just trying it on, basically, just to try and get a bit of money knocked off as much as anything. At least you can go back to your terms and say, well, actually, it stipulates in there X, Y, and Z, so we can do this, but unfortunately, Mr. Client, you can't do that. So basically, you're not in a good position. And ultimately, if ever got all the way to a court hearing, to a trial, the first thing a district judge is going to do is say, let's have a look at your contract or your terms and conditions. If you don't have one in place, you're already starting on the back foot. So by virtue of that, the judge can then look over your contract, your T's and C's, and say, well, actually, yeah, you're in the right here. And ultimately, then you know that you're in a real good position. Another one is the business protection side of things. So I'll use a bit of an example. So riding a bike, loads of people ride bikes. We've all done it as kids. Under UK law, you don't have to wear a helmet to ride a bike. However, it's highly recommended for obvious reasons. You know, if you decide to go on your bike, you come off and smash your head and you haven't got a helmet on, you're going to basically injure yourself pretty badly. A little bit like not having contracts and T's and C's in place. So by law, you don't have to have them. However, if you don't, and you run into one of these awkward customers and things don't go well for you, you're potentially in a real awkward scenario. So just to list a few sort of examples, there can be things such as applying to a legal relationship with your clients. So by virtue of that, what it means is you know where you stand, your client knows where you stand. And I'll go back to the last example of going to court. So it sets out exactly where you are. It covers things such as your limitation of liability. So if something does go wrong, we can basically stipulate that you are liable for certain things, but not certain for others. There's also things such as, particularly those who are dealing with consumers, they'll cover GDPR and confidentiality. So as people may know, GDPR came in May 2018. And what it did, it basically heightened the onus upon businesses to look after client data. If client data gets lost, basically you're going to get a big slap on the wrist from the ICO. So we can write that into your terms to say that basically you're permitted to handle the client data and that you'll look after it. Another thing that covers is the distance selling regulations. So for people who do transactions online, really useful because there's a potential 14-day cooling off period that can come in. And I know a lot more people are pushing their businesses online to take bookings, etc., and not going out to site. If that's the scenario, basically you need to cover what we call the distance selling regulations. Most people know it is the 14-day cooling off period, but that can be written into your terms as well. So there's a number of things there which hopefully emphasise the importance of having your terms in place. But it's not just a matter of having them in place; it's ensuring that they're written correctly and they give you that maximum protection ultimately.
Yeah. Do you know what? As you know, I've taught thousands and coached thousands of other tradesmen and women, tradespeople, business owners, and the vast majority of people that I come across, they don't have any terms and conditions, and in particular subcontractors agreements, which I know we're going to touch on. Why is that? Because we all know the importance of it. We all know that we need to protect our business, but for some bizarre reason, that protection and that asset that we're building, people just seem to be a bit blasé with it. So why do you think that is?
I think, again, it's down to maybe people not understanding what they need. I mean, I'll be honest, I work primarily with trades, obviously, same as yourself, Craig, and people often within the trade industry, and it's not just the trade industry, it's often in other industries as well, but I'll use that as an example. When people set up on their own, they're experts in that field, whether it be joiners, whether it be plumbers, whether it be electricians, and they just set off on the merry way. I've got some work coming in, absolutely fine. What we'll do, we'll crack on, and we'll get the work in. The work's coming in fantastic, and that's all well and good. However, it's ensuring what you've got in the background is just as important as being out on the tools and doing the work. So what we'll often find is where people set off on the merry way, not really sort of realise that they should have the terms in place, or might be aware that they might have the terms, but think, actually, it's all right, I'll just leave that till later because it's not going to affect me. And then it's when they hit that client dispute, when they get that debt, when they're struggling with cash flow, for example, they realise, oh, actually, I should have got this in place. And unfortunately, we get a lot of clients coming to us, what I call reactive clients. So they've hit the buffers, they've got that problem, and then it's actually, oh, right, what do we need to do? Right, let's get your terms put in place. What I prefer is, obviously, if we could do it the other way around and people come to us at the start, and then at least that way going forward, you're going to minimise those problems arising. I mean, just to sort of touch on a few consequences of not having your terms in place, there's some real ones which really stand out, and some people might be listening and think, oh, actually that seems a little bit extreme, but ultimately they're not. So first one is getting sued by clients. We kind of touched on it very briefly, but nobody wants that. Nobody wants to be dragged through the courts. Particularly at the moment, the courts, they have huge backlogs. So even getting to a trial, county court hearing, you are talking, I would say, as an absolute bare minimum, 12 months. You could even be, ultimately, I've seen cases take up to 2 years, if not longer. And what that basically means is it's taking you away from doing your job. You're then having to find certain documents, having to file witness statements, deal with court deadlines, which nobody likes to do. You don't want to be in that scenario. Another one is cash flows. We've touched on, in terms of running a business is hard enough, and we all have suppliers to pay. We have subcontractors. We have staff to pay. We all have God knows how many different overheads, don't we? From your accountant, which is obviously essential, to maybe CRM systems, for example, your IT systems. So we all know that. So, but if you're in a position where you don't have your terms and you're stuck with a load of outstanding money, what you're going to do when you come to that point? You can't not pay your suppliers, your accountant, etc. So I've seen and I'm aware of situations where people have had to dip further into their own funds, which, particularly in this day and age, people don't tend to have, that cash fund tucked away in the piggy bank. They've had to increase overdrafts, which again, nobody wants to do because again, there's interest involved. People having to take out loans or even, asking family members, for example, to bail them out. And that's purely down to the fact that the cash flow has been hit massively by these awkward clients who don't feel like they should pay. You can't avoid being in that scenario. And the worst one, and I know it might sound very extreme, but, people can lose their businesses over it because ultimately, and I'm aware of a company recently who were on the cusp of going under because one large contractor they had, the road is significant, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds here, and they were on the cusp of going down. Thankfully, they dug themselves out of it, but we are talking literally a matter of days before they were going under. And again, I do realise that's not going to happen all the time, but it is a possibility that can happen, and nobody wants to be in that position, particularly when you can do things to safeguard your business.
Yeah. And, one of the questions that I ask is, why haven't you got your terms and conditions in place? Why haven't you got subcontractors agreements? Because you know what it's like with subbies, they're a law to themselves sometimes, and then disagreements start with that. And I say, listen, just get things put in place. Why haven't you got them? And they're like this, Craig, I've been in business for 6 years, 10 years, 15 years, and I've never needed them. So why should I go and invest and start spending money that I haven't got, or money that I've got put to one side for things like websites or paid ads? Why should I do it? And I said to him, listen, right now, you might not have never had to use them. But the minute somebody tries to shaft you, or the minute somebody tries to not pay you, and that domino effect kicks in with all them problems and pain points that you've just gone through, you'd wish that you'd have invested whatever it's going to be to have them put in place in the first place. It's crazy not to protect your asset. So with this then, we get that and we understand. And I think everybody that's either watching this, maybe on YouTube or on Spotify, or listening to it on any of our audio platforms, I think they'll agree that they do actually need them. But the next question is, what do we actually need? Because there's certain, terms and conditions, we understand that. But I speak to people about things like subcontractors agreements, and they're like, I didn't realize I should have had one. So can you just share with us and advise us, what are the most important legal documents that any business needs to have in place to give themselves the best opportunity to safeguard their own business and asset? What would they be?
Okay, yeah. So there's 5 main ones, which I would say basically come into play, which would cover most businesses out there. So the first one would be your terms and conditions.
Okay.
Number two would be your contracts for goods and services. Number 3 would be your maintenance contracts. Number 4 would be subcontractor agreements. And your fifth one would be website, terms of use, and privacy policies.
Right, okay. So 5 different types of legal documents, right? I get that. So let's just start off. Can we break them down and just give people a bit more context to what each one of them is? So option point number 1, you said terms and conditions. So just explain what goes into a set of terms and conditions.
Yeah, great. T's and C's, people, very commonly heard of. The what we call a fixed document. So T's and C's are a type of contract. It's just a contract that doesn't tend to get negotiated or changed. Various things that go into them. I'll touch on a sort of a few important elements. So obviously we've touched on payment, massively important. But in addition to that, we've got your limitation of liability. So that kind of outlines what you are and what you're not potentially liable for. For those who use goods and materials, which obviously I know is really common with trades guys, we will cover off sort of your title and risk clauses. So what that basically means is the legal ownership of the items. So in short, basically, legal ownership shouldn't transfer until they've been paid in full. The risk in the items that passes over when they're delivered at site. Various other bits and pieces like client obligations, really important. So that's basically flipping the onus back onto your client, saying we can provide our services, but we need you to do X, Y, and Z for us. Again, I'll throw in a couple of common things which we often put in for trades guys, making sure you've got full and clear access to site. If you need things moving like furniture, for example, in rooms, ensuring you've got use of utilities on site, even as far to say, look, we need parking or, toilet on site as well. Things which you often think, well, look, that we should get that anyway, but for sake of clarity and for protection for you, we put it into the document. And there's also, as I've briefly mentioned before, things such as GDPR, confidentiality. I could go on, but that's just to kind of give you a little bit of a flavour of the type of things that we put in there.
Okay. So T's and C's, number 1. You said contracts of goods and services would be the second one. So can you just give us a bit more context around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So contracts for goods and services, they're actually in part quite similar to T's and C's. One of the main differences is that with a contract, they are often open to negotiation. So where you'd have your T's and C's, like I said, I'd use that as kind of a fixed document. So that would kind of stay as it is. What you're saying, Mr. Client, this is how we work, and if you come on board with us, that's how we do it. Contracts, they often get looked at and then thrown back, saying, actually, would you mind tweaking this for us? Can you tweak that? And another slight difference is what you'll tend to do normally is with a contract, you'll get it signed by the parties at the end. Often with T's and C's, yes, you can get it signed, but another way of doing that is getting some other form of express acceptance. You can use Tickbox, for example, which we'll all have done online. You can send it across with a copy of your quotation, and by having the appropriate wording on your quote, when they reply back to an email, you've got confirmation of acceptance of the T's and C's. Like I say, it's a little bit different with your contracts for goods and services. Also with your contracts, another big benefit of using those is if you need to vary things quite a lot. So let's say, for example, you're going to engage with 2 different companies providing similar services, but for company A, you're going to do X, Y, and Z. And for company B, you're going to do A, B, and C. So what you would do is you can add schedules onto the back. And by virtue of that, what you can do is just add in, say, right, for that client, we're going to do these services, and you can even put a secondary schedule for your payment terms, for example. So contracts for goods and services are a little bit more of a variable document, but again, runs off a similar sort of format to your T's and C's. And it's just as important. It's really kind of what fits best for your company and how you work.
Yeah. Okay. So that was point number 2. Number 3, you said maintenance contracts. So I understand what maintenance contracts are, but there might be people out there that aren't. So can you just share with us what you mean by maintenance contracts?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably the best way is to use a few examples, in all honesty. So we've worked with a number of clients over the years, and often it's certain industries that will utilise these. So plumbers, for example, is a one way where this often gets used. So use an example of a company who fits boilers. So what they will do is they'll go in, fit a boiler, and then what they'll want to do is, in addition to that, they'll want to add on a maintenance contract. So the beauty of maintenance contracts is, from a cash flow perspective, fantastic, because you can either do monthly payments, or you could even just say, well, actually, you can pay as a one-off, but you're covered for a year. But what it also means that you've got that client locked in for that period. So going back to the example, fit a boiler, what you'll say under the maintenance contract, you could either just say, right, we'll provide you with an annual service under the terms, or others will do, actually, we'll provide, let's say, gold, silver, and bronze packages, where, depending on which one you get, the level of maintenance you potentially get will improve. So, you'll get companies will say, actually, well, we'll do if you get the gold package, you can have emergency call outs, whether it's 24 hours a day. We will repair things up to a certain level, for example. So they're really, really useful. And, one, from a cash flow perspective, looking at it with my business hat on, but also from a legal perspective, when you have these in place, it's important to set out the parameters of what is covered and what isn't. So going back to the example of plumber fitting boilers, a really important element is not only outlining what you do get, but also what you don't get under the terms of the agreement, because the last thing you want is your client contacting you for every little thing. And if you've not outlined what isn't covered in there, so I know one which often gets thrown up is, you basically don't want to be liable for sort of pre-existing issues on the site, or if there's problems. Let's say, for example, you might have fit the boiler, but you haven't had to change all the pipework in the house, which again is really common. You normally just go and do the boiler. What you don't want to be doing is then getting dragged back because your client has got a problem with some pipework that might have been fitted 20, 30 years ago, when ultimately it's not part of the package. So again, it's really useful to set out, yes, you do get this, but also, Mr. Client, I'm afraid you don't get that. And again, great things for companies.
Yeah. Do you know what? I think we've all had it, haven't we? Where you're working in somebody's house or business or premises, and you go and do your job, and then you leave, and then a day or two later, you get that phone call, don't you? Oh, we've noticed this. This is not right. And it were right before you started. What have you done? And it's like, well, hang on a minute, we hadn't even touched that. We didn't go anywhere near it. But all of a sudden, because you were in their premises, you're to blame for something that's got nothing to do with you. Crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you know, I hear that a lot, Craig, as well. We get phone calls about that, and it's, I appreciate, for the guys in the trades, it must be a nightmare phone call to get.
Yeah. And also, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it. Customers talk about, let's say, nightmare builders, nightmare tradespeople. And let's face it, we've all been stereotypically tarred by that brush. I don't care what anybody says. When you're a tradesperson or a building company or whatever, and you're working particularly in domestic market, before people have even seen you or spoken to you, you are labelled as a cowboy builder. What about the flip side of that? I mean, that's probably a good podcast for another time. Cowboy customers who actually, legitimately, there are people out there, I'm sure, that actually, there's nothing, they actually find something wrong for the sake of it because they're trying to get something for free, whether that's through your insurance or whatever. But customers at worst of the worst, you ought to have cowboy customers. Anyway, rant over. Let's move on. So maintenance were number 3. Now this one, point number 4, is a really important agreement that we should have in place, because I know from my past experience, 30 years, owning a building company, that sometimes subcontractors can be a law to themselves, or they think they can, and they want to start dictating to you on what they're going to do in your business. So talk to us about the importance of these, because this is really important that we get these right.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's something that we're helping more and more companies with, certainly within the last 12 to 18 months. So current markets, basically more and more people are using subcontractors as opposed to direct employees for the obvious benefits. But with those benefits, unfortunately, comes risks as well. And it's ensuring that you're covered for those risks. So, you kind of touched on it, Craig. Often people say, well, I've used this subby, I've known him for years. I used to go for a pint with him on a Friday afternoon. We agreed it over a pint, and we both wrote a few figures on the back of a beer mat. We'll all be fine. But unfortunately, we live in a very different day and age, and it's important to set out your parameters. And by that, what I mean is the working relationship between you and them. So, it affords them a little bit of protection, but ultimately it's there to give you the maximum protection that you need. So with a subcontractor, as you'll know as well as I do, Craig, they're effectively an extension of your firm. Your clients basically see them as part of your firm. As far as they're concerned, they're effectively an employee. I know some companies will even say to the subbies, whilst you're out there, you've got to wear our branded clothing. So it's really important that they adhere to your standards, because ultimately they're the face of your company whilst they're out on site, aren't they? So the way we handle the subcontractor agreements is very much from the focus of, okay, Mr. Subcontractor, I'm more than happy for you to work for us, but you've got to adhere to these guidelines. And that's not being overly bearing. It's just coming from the point of view of, well, what standards do you expect? So, we cover things, there's certain obligations that we put in there. So they've got to be smart, look and be dressed smart. They've got to be on time. They've got to be respectful. I've written in to God knows how many subcontractor agreements now, for the subbies not to swear on site, not to smoke on site. Think little things like that, which I know can be a real massive bugbear. With respect to sort of payment side of things, again, really important, because ultimately you need X, Y, and Z from your subcontractors. Often, it's an invoice or a timesheet provided by X point of the week, and then you will pay them at whatever point further down the line. And again, we'd structure all that into the document for you, so it outlines nice and clear what they've got to do, and then you'll pay them. If they don't do that, you're not limited to pay them. Massively important point is your limitation of liability. So I've touched on that in the other documents, but really important is, so if something goes wrong, what happens in that scenario? So generally what occurs is, let's say Mr. Subcontractor's out on site, he makes a bit of a cock up, your client phones you saying, not happy with this, what are you going to do about it? So what you normally do is step in and say, well, actually, yeah, I'll come and sort it out, don't worry, then you'll deal with the subcontractor in the background. So what we do is write into your agreement that basically if there is an issue, you can investigate it, and until basically the matter has been concluded, you can withhold any pay. But what we also write into the subcontractor agreement, which is really, really important, is that when they sign up with you, when they sign the subby agreement, they have to produce their insurance details. That way, if you can't recover any sums that you potentially lost directly from the subcontractor, you can then go directly to their insurance company, because you've already got their details on file. You probably ideally don't want to go down that route, but at least it gives you that safeguard that, if let's just say your relationship goes a little bit sour, as a company that you're protected, and you can always contact their insurance company, say, look, I'm afraid we're going to have to make a claim against this subcontractor because they've done X, Y, and Z. Various other bits and pieces in there, things such as ensuring they stick to any health and safety guidelines. Even if you do risk assessments on site, we can write it in there that they have to adhere to any risk assessments, and if there's any training protocols, if they're doing any training. So look, I don't want to kind of go through every finite detail, but hopefully that gives like a real good flavour of what's in there, and and what protection they can give you. And honestly, Craig, they're worth their weight in gold. And it's a document where I say to people, again, you draft it once, and in general terms, you should be able to use that across all your subcontractors, because again, we can add schedules on the back if you need to vary them, and that will last you for years and years. It's only if your company changes the way that you work that we just go, well, actually, let's revisit that original document and let's tweak it and make it more appropriate to how you work now.
Yeah. And I bet everybody that's either watching or listening to this podcast at some point has had some kind of, let's say, run-in with a subcontractor where it's ended ugly one way or another. Somebody's not got paid. I want to go through your insurance. No, you should be insured. Well, I'm not finishing job until you've paid me. Subcontractors start saying to you, and it's like, oh, it's a nightmare. So this is why I'm saying it's so important that we get these in place. So that's great. Okay. Final one, number 5, you said, well, website terms of use. So you just want to share that with us?
Yeah, so I'll touch on this briefly. So as more and more companies getting driven online, and even for trades, and by that what I mean is people go on your website, they can have a quick look at your pictures, for example, and they can actually book on for certain services. Appreciate some will always need like a site visit, but more and more people are going down the online route because it's easier. It drives, as well as anyone, Craig, how important it is to have your online presence and have a good website that generates your work. So if you are going down that route, you should always have website terms of use, privacy policy, and potentially cookie policy. Now, I use the example of those who are doing bookings, but it doesn't just apply to them. In all honesty, anybody who's got a website, you should really have these in place. However, for those who do the online bookings, again, it's probably even more important, because it's really important that when your clients are utilizing your website, they're not just there to have a little flick through. It's important that they know what they can do on your website and also what they are protected from. And by that, particularly with consumers, you need to be very, very clear what you do with their data. So touching on the privacy policy side of things, they are so important, because if a client is going to come on your website and book something, they're going to have to put name, probably address, or at very minimum, email address, telephone number in there. That's all client data that you're handling. Your privacy policy needs to stack up to ensure that you've got the authority to use that data, because we write it in that your client's giving you, or your potential client's giving you the authority. But it also outlines what you will and what you won't do with that client data. Also, your cookie policies. People have all heard about cookies online. So that's just a little bit more basic document, but it outlines that your company will potentially use cookies and the reasons behind them. So those particularly your website terms of use and your privacy policy, and cookie policy is often a little bit of an add-on, but they're all really important for anybody who's got a website out there. And just quickly, difference between your website terms of use and your terms and conditions are your terms of use outline what can and can't be done on the website, as opposed to your terms and conditions, which outline what you're going to do in terms of the goods and services.
Yeah. And particularly what I teach through my coaching, we are getting more and more tradespeople now taking deposits online using Stripe and all this type of thing. So if you're taking payments online and you're taking valuable data, email addresses, mobile numbers, house addresses and all that, if you are doing sort of like online home surveys and things like that, you've got to have these things in place. And again, it comes back to what we said at the beginning. People look at it and go, I know I should have them, but they don't see it as a priority until the proverbial hits the fan. Then they'll wish they'd had them, which is what we said. Okay. So that's great, Michael. So we're suggesting that people go and consider bringing 5 different types of conditions in, which is great. What mistakes do you see business owners making when attempting to do their own T's and C's? Because I know for a fact that other people try and do them themselves. They try and do it on the cheap. So what's the consequences of doing that? And what should they stay away from doing?
Yeah, so it tends to normally fall into kind of three main brackets. The first one is a word which people will have heard many times, is using templates. Look, we all know what a template is, but ultimately you can never get a template that's going to be fit for purpose. Yeah, we can all jump on Google, for example, say, template terms and conditions. It'll throw up a load of documents for you. Will they be fully fit for purpose for you? Not a chance. It's a bit of an old adage. It's kind of the meat on the bones. So unless you've got legal training and legal background, you are not going to know what needs to go onto that template. A template's effectively a skeleton with a little bit of information on it. But it's what you insert onto that is what basically provides you with the protection. So they aren't fit for purpose. Like I said, they only give a really, really brief outline. And ultimately, they're not going to give you the protection that you need. So, for example, I don't know, if I wanted to do a bit of DIY at home, let's say I wanted to fit a radiator. So I could stick it into YouTube. I'll be honest, DIY is certainly not my forte, but let's just say I wanted to go down that route. I could Google it, probably YouTube would pop up, wouldn't it, say, here's how to fit a radiator at home. Now, yeah, I could try and have a go at that, but I tell you what, no word of a lie, I would make a royal cock-up of it. I could have a look, see what some plumber's doing online who, could probably do it with his eyes closed because he's done it 1,000,001 times. I go, yeah, well, actually, I'll have a bit of a bash at that. But ultimately, because I'm not trained in that area, irrespective of what I can see as a video online, I ain't going to be able to replicate what they can do. And it's a little bit similar with templates, so you can pull off a template and say, oh, yeah, I can adapt that one. I'll just add a little bit in here. I think I know what my payment terms are. Yeah, so it might be 7 days. All right, yeah, I'll do that. But ultimately, you are never going to get it to the position where it's a fully fit for purpose document. And that's the risk with templates, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Okay. So templates is one mistake that you see people making. Any more?
Yes, second one, and again, I'm sure you've probably heard about this one, Craig, as well. Borrowing other people's.
Let's
It's something
download
which, yeah, exactly. So, see, look, each business is different. No two businesses are the same. So, you could have plumber, one plumber in city centre, another plumber half a mile down the road. Another plumbing firm, but they ain't going to work the same. They might provide similar sort of services, but every company is different. We all turn on our own nuances, whether it's from payment terms to service levels to working hours. I could go on and on. So the reason why it's no good borrowing somebody else's is your company is never going to be the same as theirs. So irrespective of how close you even think you might be, unless you've got a document that is drafted specifically to you, it's never going to work. And I've used this example a number of times before. I once had a client come to me and said, I've got some terms, I don't need new ones. Would you mind reviewing and updating them for me? So I said, yeah, absolutely fine. Send me over what you've got. Let me take a quick glance first, and then I'll give you a little bit of feedback before we move any further forward. It transpired that they'd borrowed some T&Cs from a friend's company who was in a totally different industry. He'd been trying to pass them off as his own, and he'd not even changed the company names all the way through. So he had set T&Cs for his company, but it had somebody else's company name written in them. So it's just not even worth the piece of paper that it's written on. So yeah, again, not something I would recommend. Because it's never going to be appropriate. They need to be bespoke, and the name of the game, and I've probably said it 101 times now, but they've got to be fit for purpose.
Yeah. And what? Any more? Is there any more?
Yeah. One other one. Again, and it's something that we hear all too often, sadly, is downloading a competitors. So people have a look, say, actually, they're in the same industry as me. I've heard they're quite good for example. Let me see what they've got. So I'll bob on their website. Oh, there we go. They've got some terms and conditions. Well, they're a little bit similar to me, so I think I might try and pull them off as my own. So going back to the point, I'm not going to regurgitate. They're not going to be fit for purpose because they're a different company to you. Because they're not going to be appropriately drafted for you. However, there is something which is just as important. If you, I'll use the word pinch, borrow would be a polite way of using it, but ultimately you're pinching somebody else's. If you do that and take it from somebody else's website, for example, that's a potential copyright infringement because you don't have authority to borrow those. So basically, if you go and think, well, actually, I'll just pass them off at my own, I'll get them and I'll just change a couple of things, change my name. If you get found out, you could get hit with a lawsuit, and nobody wants a copyright infringement lawsuit because you're facing down the barrel of a decent wedge of money if you get found to be guilty.
Yeah. And you know what? It is, isn't it? Yeah, I know of, and I've seen other people trying to borrow them, downloading these cheap templates and trying to butcher them to make them their own, downloading them off the competitor's website and just changing their name or their address. But you're right. Your payment terms aren't the same as other people's payment terms. What you want and how you want things to work in your business aren't the same as anybody else's. And again, it comes back down to why are people just trying to scrimp and scrape on pulling these legal documents together when ultimately it's their baby, it's their business, it's their asset that they're building for sometimes decades and decades. Why put yourself at risk? Which brings me over, I suppose, to another question, which would be, I'm guessing there's people thinking this is all well and good, Michael, and I'm interested, or I know I need them, but how much is this going to cost me? What do I need to invest into terms and conditions? Because obviously I've had terms and conditions done, and I've had them done from £800 to £1,000, some are 1,500, some are £2,000, and everywhere in between. So just to give people an idea of budget to put these in place? What do they need to be budgeting for to get some professional terms and conditions written up for their business?
Really important thing. Ultimately, every company has a certain parameters that they can work within. So, I'd often say to people, look, your starting point is probably around about £1,000 mark. If something, again, as you've touched on, it sort of depends what you're doing, what you need in them, how your business works. So, £1,000 tends to be sort of your starting point. Most businesses probably fall in the bracket of £1,000 to £1,500. But it really depends on how you work as a business, what the intricacies are of the goods and services that you provide. But hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea. And what I often say to people is ultimately it's a long-term investment. It's something that will stand the test of time. You get this document, you'll use it hundreds of times over various number of clients. And, in an ideal world, say to people, look, check them every 12 months, have a little bit of review just to make sure that, they're still correct as you want them. But even if you don't get round to doing that, the only other times that you would really need to change them is if there's a change in law. So the last time there was really one which impacted your T's and C's contract was when GDPR came in May 2018. So that doesn't happen very often. Another time is if you are adding or changing services or your payment side of things. But again, all you're doing, you've got your core document, and it's just a matter of tweaking and changing that. So, you could end up with a set of T's and C's that could last you 5-10 years. You could have used God knows how many hundreds of clients. And, I had a client recently come back to us. We drafted hers 8 years ago. We're now updating them the start of this year, and she made a rough calculation of how many times that she'd actually used the terms from when we drafted them, and it turns out for each client you're talking of like pounds, a few pounds, but she knew she was protected from day one because she got them right at the very outset. And here she is 8 years later. Barring we tweaked the GDPR side of things, but 8 years later we'll come to the point we're just going to tweak them again, and she knows she should be fine again going forward.
Yeah. And when you start, I appreciate, for some businesses, probably some businesses that maybe are just starting off, £1,000 or whatever it's going to be is a lot of money to invest. And what most people are thinking of is, well, hang on a minute, I could use that £1,000 on my marketing. And they're focusing on what I would say is a short-term win with that investment, i.e., if I stick that £1,000 into marketing, I'm going to get some work or I might get some more jobs. It's a short-term win. What we need to be looking at with protecting assets is the long-term gain. So for me, spending £1,000, £2,000, protecting my business and my asset that I'm going to put my life and blood into, and having them documents there to protect me is priceless for me. For me, everybody should have them. Okay, Michael, so listen, you've shared some really, really valuable knowledge and information that I'm sure everybody is going to take on board. If people are thinking of, do you know what, I need these terms and conditions, and they're thinking of contacting you, Michael, what would you say is the best way of people being able to contact you? How do you want them to contact you?
Various ways. Look, we're kind of one of those law firms, so we're just as modern as most firms now. So we've got various channels, obviously telephone, an email. I can just see the details popping across at the bottom. They're very simple. But also our Facebook page at MJL Law Limited. We get a lot of inquiries through there, people coming via Messenger. LinkedIn as well. So whether that's my personal page, just search for Michael Long, and also MJL Law. We've got our business page on there. And I've even got a TikTok account as well, where we do get some inquiries via that. It's just called Straight Talking Solicitor. So yeah, whichever of those channels, look, we're more than happy to deal with however the inquiries come in. The main thing is, look, get in touch with us if you've got any questions, if you want a bit of guidance, a bit of advice. We're here to help people.
Wonderful. Well, Michael, thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights. I know for sure that there'll be people that'll be watching and listening to this podcast that have learned something new from your valuable knowledge today. So thanks ever so much for being on the show, and we'll speak to you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig.
So what an insightful interview there with Michael Long. I'm sure you might have got some of the 5 different types of legal agreements in place already, but what are you missing? What do you now need to go away and take action on to make sure that you safeguard you, your business, and your asset? If you're not following us on social media, such as TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, please follow us at Trades Freedom Club, and don't forget to join our thriving and safe trades community in our Facebook group, and I'll catch up with you on our next episode. Thank you.